Good evening. From our experience last night, and probably from the experience that some of you have had today, you will notice that it is not easy at first to carry out a program of practicing the presence of God. There is the matter of forgetting, and there is the matter of being too busy to remember, to think. None of this is harmful as long as we continue to make the effort until the activity of practicing the presence of God becomes automatic, becomes a natural part of our living. In other words, we do come to a place where we do not look at human beings and then translate what we see and realize that Christ is the nature of being, but rather you come to a place where you are no longer aware that you're greeting just human beings, some good, some bad, some indifferent, and nearly all made up of a combination of good and evil. You automatically greet only the spiritual identity and ignore the appearance. In the same way, as you persist in this practice, and at first you are confronted with material laws, like laws of weather or climate, laws of infection or contagion, heredity laws, laws of hereditary disease or hereditary characteristics. These impinge themselves upon your consciousness. You can't help it. You're aware of it all of the time. And yet, as you practice this, and remember that since God is the only lawgiver, the only possible law can be a spiritual law, and then each time that you are confronted with the law of heredity or the law of weather or of climate or of infection or contagion, you automatically realize, no, this is not law, this is belief, this is built up in the mind of men. But if God is spirit and if God is law, there is only spiritual law. Now, after a while, it becomes much simpler than that, because regardless of how often you are faced with material law, or in how many forms it appears, you automatically negate it without even a conscious thought, in the realization spiritual law is the only power. All of this practice begins in this way, just as roughly as beginning to take piano lessons and having to hit one key at a time, and then gradually getting to where it's automatic to just go through 5 and then 8. The main thing to remember is this, that all that you are trying to do is to realize that actually God governs this world even as it governs the spiritual world. Actually, that is not true at the present moment in human experience, but it becomes true in your experience in the degree of your realization. In other words, material law is very real. If it weren't, we wouldn't need so many hospitals. Weather and climate affect the health of people. If it weren't for that, we wouldn't have so many people ill with diseases that are produced by weather and climate. But this is only true in the absence of the realization of spiritual law as being the only true law and the only power. Now, it is for this reason, then, that one individual who becomes consciously aware of God as the nature of individual man in his true being, one individual who becomes aware of the fact that the only law that really is law is spiritual law, that one individual can be a practitioner for thousands of people and nullify these laws of weather, of food, of contagion, and so forth. That is why it has remained a mystery that if you say that God is all, if you say that only God is power, why is there so much discord? And the answer is, God is only the only power to a consciousness that has been imbued with this truth, that has accepted it first perhaps intellectually, then practiced it until it became a reality in that individual's consciousness. In other words, the reason we have discords is that as human beings we have been brought up to acknowledge two powers, a good power and an evil power. Therefore, as ye believe in your heart, so is it unto you. Therefore, if you are convinced, which we all are, remember, as human beings, we've been born and we've been brought up to believe in two powers, to love the good power, to hate or fear the evil power. This was the very point upon which Adam and Eve were cast out of Eden. This is the very point upon which you and I remain outside of the Garden of Eden. As long as we can be made to believe that there are two powers, to acknowledge two powers, to respond to two powers, it will be so unto us. Now, let there be one Jesus Christ to look at the crippled man and say, what did hinder you? Rise, pick up your bed and walk. We have a healer. We have an individual who has recognized the original revelation of Scripture, God, the creative principle of all that is, God that made all that is, God that made it good, God that found it good. Anything God did not make was not made. Therefore, all that exists is good. When you can return to that original state of consciousness, and instead of trying to heal the crippled man, merely realize there is no power but God, pick up your bed and walk, he does so. When Jesus Christ can look at the blind man and not say, I will go to God for you, I will see that God overcomes this terrible disease. No, but when Jesus can say, open your eyes. In other words, you don't need healing. You've accepted the belief in two powers. But I'm saying to you that only God is power. You have the healer. So it is today, when you can find a spiritual healer who is not going to try to reform you, or to find the error in your thought, or to find what caused the disease, or to make an appeal to God to cure it for you, but when you can find a spiritual healer who within himself or herself has come to the realization that God's grace is a sufficiency, that there is no power of disease to overcome, there is no physical law to set aside, that all of God reveals, Son, I am ever with thee. All that I have is thine. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. In other words, there is nothing here but me and my power, and you need not fear any other power. Then you have a healer really doing beautiful work. It won't all be instantaneous work, because human consciousness itself rejects that very principle, or sometimes in its ignorance it is sitting around waiting for some great power of God to come and do something to it. Or it is convinced that because of its human errors, sins of omission or commission, it isn't quite deserving of healing. And you don't always break through that state of consciousness instantaneously, and so the practitioner must be patient with that individual until they too come to realize, I have been dishonoring God. I have been believing with Paul that the carnal mind is enmity against God. Of course, if Paul hadn't believed that, he wouldn't have been persecuted and beaten and imprisoned almost every day and week of his life. He was always out battling the carnal mind, and it really battled him. It is very much that way today. There are people actually fearing a mental malpractice from one source or another, as if God had empowered the human mind to destroy its work. Now, once you understand the nature of God as infinite power, you no more fear mental powers than you do physical powers. For mental powers are as much nothingness as physical powers. There is really no power in the human thought. That is why when you turn to the teachings of thought as power, you do for a while see some demonstrations of that, but it doesn't last. It can't last, because You are only bringing forth the fruitage in proportion to your own faith in it. Actually, thought is not power. Never was, never can be. Good thought is not power. Evil thought is not power. The only illustration I can think of at the moment is this, that if all of us here united from now until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning to think 2 times 2 to be 5, it still wouldn't be so. If you and I were to sit here until Christmas Day, united in the thought that your apple trees would produce oranges, I promise you, not one orange would come through. If we should unite from now until tomorrow to stop nightfall from coming, with all the power of our combined metaphysical thought, I promise you it wouldn't be delayed by a second. Thought isn't power. Mind has been given to us as an avenue of awareness. With my mind or through my mind, I can read books, I can understand, I can read music or literature, I can understand art or science, I can bring forth inventions. The mind is one of God's greatest instruments that has been given to us, just as our bodies have been given to us. But our bodies haven't been given to us for the purpose of fighting with each other, punching each other, or kicking each other. Our bodies haven't been given to us to waste away in sensuality. Our bodies were given to us as instruments for life, instruments for moving, instruments for getting around in the universe into which we are born. In the same way, we have been given a mind, and this mind of ours is the purest, most wonderful faculty that man possesses. But it was given to him for the purpose of becoming aware of knowledge, of study, of thinking, of reasoning, but not to use it to supplant God's power. God it is that is the all-knowing intelligence. Now let us see this. A Thomas Edison is credited with being the inventor of the electric light. Is he? Of course he isn't. Of course he isn't. He is the discoverer of the principles which govern of the electric light. Did he create this in his mind by taking thought? No, he did the opposite. He blanked his thought, he opened his ear always this way, and then inside of him was revealed these principles which he hooked up, which became electric light, which became the graphophone, the gramophone. Nobody invents. Inventors discover laws that have been in existence since the beginning of time, if there was a beginning. And all they have done is to become aware of laws that always existed. Composers do not create pieces of music. They turn within and they hear these glorious melodies that emanate from within their own soul. Melodies that were created not by man, but by God. Of course, the imitators just take the 8 notes that are in existence and twist them around, and we have Tin Pan Alley. But I'm speaking now of composers, those who are dedicated artists, inspired men and women who have learned to meditate, to be quiet, to be still, to listen, and then all of a sudden become aware of divine harmonies, melodies. This is the real music of all the ages. And art has come forth, painting and sculpture in the same way. No man's brain made it, but somebody's mind received these divine impressions which skill and art and inspiration brought forth later on canvas, marble, and so forth. Now, in this same way, we don't have to create our supply or our health. We have to become aware of the supply and health that is of God, and that is God's gift to us, so that ultimately we say, oh, I'm glad I have no supply. I have received God's supply. I'm grateful I have no health of my own. God has revealed his health as the health of my body. This is an eternal health, an immortal health, a perfect health, a vital health, a youthful health, an eternal one. Now, when you begin to perceive this, and then you realize that, of course, there are people in the world mentally manipulating, or as these advertisements, which I've read here this week in the papers, telling you how you can manipulate people around you so as to get your will, makes you wonder who is manipulating you to get their will. And actually, what is their will? To take your money? To make you buy what they have to sell, whether or not you need it? Makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it? To feel that somebody is training themselves mentally to manipulate you so that they may be successful. You don't like that. Therefore, you don't like the idea that you can use the power of thought to get your will. Well, certainly you don't want it done unto you. And actually, and I say this to you after many, many years of study of the subject, those who do use their mental powers either selfishly or evilly have a reaction upon themselves which in the end destroys themselves. For this is the law. As ye do unto others, it will definitely be done unto you. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. If you don't believe it, there is no use of your even pretending to follow the teaching of Jesus Christ. It is a part of a karma which we set in effect the very moment we do something. We have set in effect the law that returns unto us. Fortunately, the good that we set in motion returns to us. But if it does, it only proves the law that whatever you set in motion must return to you. And therefore, the selfishness, the evil, the greed that you would set in motion by a mental desire or mental control must inevitably return unto you. Now, we have nothing to do, remember, with those who wish to partake of that way of life, That may be their state of consciousness at this moment. I am merely imparting to you the message of the infinite way, which teaches that we are not to use the power of thought for acquiring anything, demonstrating anything, getting anything. The power of thought is to be used only for study, for thinking through our problems, for reasoning, for working through in any legitimate way any problem that is brought to us that requires knowledge for solution. In other words, we use the power of our mind and thought in mathematics and in music and in art and in literature, but we do not use it as a power. Now, when you realize this, you will realize that it isn't your thought that blesses anyone, that is, sending out of good thoughts, nor is it your evil thought that could curse anyone. Those things can only happen in accord with ignorance or blind belief. The power that emanates from your being is your awareness of God as the only power. Every time you come into the presence of an individual who knows that I, of my own self, can do nothing. I have no powers for good. I have no powers for evil. But I am oh so aware of the fact that God is Spirit. And the Spirit is here and now. And this is the only power, the all power, the divine power, the impersonal power, the power of good. You can never mistake when you are in the presence of that individual. You are apt to say, this is a spiritual person. Actually, that may be a true description, but that which makes them a spiritual person is that they are acknowledging Spirit alone as power, that they are acknowledging spiritual law alone as power, that they are acknowledging spiritual substance alone as the substance of the body, the substance of being, the substance of the universe. Yes, when you feel this spiritual power in one, holy power or sacred power, remember what it is you're feeling. It just means you've met an individual who is, to the extent of their understanding, living constantly and consciously in the realization that, Pilate, thou couldst have no power over me unless it came to thee from God, for God is the only power. Or the consciousness of Hezekiah. Don't fear the enemy that's twice as strong as you are, for they have only temporal power. You have the awareness of God. Spiritual presence, spiritual power, the only presence, the only power, the only being, the only one, and they have only the arm of flesh. Nothingness, no power. So as that army fought among itself and destroyed itself, so do we in healing work discover that these disease germs germs of infection, germs of contagion, germs of one nature or another, they evidently fight among themselves too. For pretty soon they destroy themselves and the patient as well. And yet, those medically trained would say, no, those germs would have to keep multiplying themselves until they destroyed you. But they didn't. They just evaporated. They didn't evaporate because you fought them. They evaporated because you knew that God had not ordained them to be destructive. Much of our healing work is brought about through that very principle. When a problem is presented to me, which in one case may be an evil person, in another case may be climate or weather or infection or contagion, often that very thought arises in me, did God ordain you to do that? Then whence came the power? Since God really is the only creative power, God is the only one who can ordain, empower. And so it becomes so clear within me that God, who is love, God, divine intelligence, God, divine love, never empowered a condition, a disease, a sin, a false appetite, and therefore if God didn't ordain it, it has no power. It is nothing. It is the arm of flesh, and I will not fight it. I will rest in this word. Now, this principle was really the start of the message of the infinite way. I have told you that what originally set me on the path was becoming aware of these evils in the world and the fact that God never seemed able to win a victory over the devil. God never seemed able to stop a war. God never seemed able to end slavery, poverty, man's injustice to man, and this set me on the path. And then I discovered that in the history of man, power was the dominating influence. At first, bows and arrows did the work. And pretty soon somebody had a rifle. And all the people who had bows and arrows were killed. It didn't make a difference whether they were good people or bad people. They went because the rifle was more destructive. And then we find out that machine guns are invented, and all the people who have only rifles, they are wiped out. And we have cannon, and we have battleships, and finally we have bombs. And whoever gets control of the mightiest, they're the winner. Right or wrong, I'm sure you remember when the British Navy was, ruler of the seas. And Germany comes along with 12 little submarines, but with such concentrated power in its bombs that England's Navy goes and America's Navy starts to follow suit. Ah, yes, but then somebody discovers a bigger power. And then the position is reversed. The Blitz, Germany had the power, so London gets a trouncing. Ah, but soon the greater power is the other way around. Germany gets the trouncing. Any question there of right or wrong? No, just who has the greatest power. So it is that on our side. Half of our Navy is blown out of the sea by a couple of Japanese ships. They had the power, we take the trouncing. A little later, we get all the power, including a couple of atomic bombs. They take the trouncing. Always it is who has the greatest power, he achieves the victory. Can that be an act of God? Can that be part of God's plan, that we must always find greater powers with which to destroy each other and to get our way? No, no, no. And so eventually, I'm driven back into the Bible. And of course, one of my great blessings was that when I was 19 years of age, the voice spoke to me and said, "Find Jesus, for he has the secret." And that's where I ultimately found it. That life is not built on the idea of power. In other words, the very opposite. Not by might and not by power, but by my Spirit. Here we have a new principle. Here we have something unknown in our world of today. What does it mean? Is it practical? Does it work? Then as we study further and further, and pray, meditate, until inwardly the Master begins to teach and reveal that that is actually the truth of life. The truth of life is not to be found in power. The truth of life is to be found in not power. In other words, since God already is infinite power, there's nothing more you can do about that to increase it, to help it, or influence it. It already is infinite. It already is omnipresent. It already is here and now. Therefore, that power you do not have to concern yourself with. It is already in operation. What you have to concern yourself with is, what about these evil powers, physical and mental? What about these material laws and mental laws, which are so destructive? And the answer is, they are not power. They are operating as power only because the human race has accepted the belief in two powers and has learned to build up a fear of that which is not power. Then comes the testing time. The ability to sit in the silence when called upon for help and realize, Father, I'm not asking for any help from you. I'm not asking any help to destroy evil or disease or sin, false appetites, lack or limitation. All I ask for is the realization of thy grace. The realization really that God is the only power, and that this condition that is confronting me isn't power, isn't really presence, that it exists only as a false sense which I've accepted, a temptation, an appearance. And then the ability to sit there quietly until the peace of God is upon me, and then find a telephone call or a letter, I'm better, or I'm healed, or the pain is gone, or the lump has disappeared, and finding that this is literally the truth. There is but one power, there is but one law, and as in heaven, so on earth. The God that is God in heaven is the God on earth. As long as you don't bring up another power for God to fight, as long as you can rest in this word, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Makes no difference to me what form of currency there is, what government is in power, what the gold value is or isn't. I can stand on Scripture. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I need not concern myself with man whose breath is in his nostril. I need not put my faith in princes. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and there's no power anywhere in heaven or on earth or in hell that can separate me from the love of God. There is no power anywhere that can separate me from the love of God. In the very moment when you perceive the infinite nature of God's being, whether manifested as power, as law, as substance, in that moment, evil has no power in your life. Again, the only example I can give you quickly is that all of us, or most of us, could walk into any barroom or pub or place of its kind, cafe, witness all of the bottles of alcoholic drinks around us, and walk right through and walk right out the other end and say, why, that had no power over me at all. Why, it never touched me. Why, it's no power. Ah, yes, but how about that person who at this moment has accepted the belief that alcohol is a power and he has to have it? Let him go through that same room and he'll tear down the place to get at it. Why? Is it a power? You've just proven that it isn't power. Only to his deluded sense is it power, and must he have it. But to you, you walk right through it. Look it right in the bottle. I can't feel any power in you, not even an attraction. So it is, ultimately you will come to see that you will look on any form of sin that exists in this world, and you'll be surprised that anybody can respond to it, that anybody can want it, that anybody can indulge it. Just as you perhaps now could look at, let's say, a thief and say, I don't understand why you have to steal. There's so much money in the world without stealing. Oh, but you'd have a hard time probably convincing that person, because they are under that belief. So one day you will witness with disease. I have been fearing it. I've been fearing it because the world has been fearing it. The world has been putting a deadly complex on disease. It has ordained disease to give pain and to cause death. And in my ignorance, I have accepted it. Now I see a different vision. Now I see that if God didn't ordain it, it hasn't that power. For whatever power it has must come from God, or else I've accepted a universal belief about it. The Master cautioned, do not judge after appearances, judge righteous judgment. Don't look at a condition and say it's terrible, it's in the last stages, it's ugly, it's painful. Turn away from that and turn within and ask yourself, is it a righteous condition? Is it of God? Is it ordained of God? Is it created of God? Can I believe that God has created a condition destructive to life when life is God? That means it must be destructive to God? Oh no, not an all-knowing intelligence, not a divine love. Gradually then, you come to the place of spiritualized consciousness, where just as you no longer use revolvers to get your way, so you no longer use thoughts to get your way. You begin now to dwell in truth. You no longer use truth to overcome error. Now you abide in the truth that error was not ordained of God. No longer do you have two powers. You see, the more you use your mind as power, eventually the more you'll have to use it and the less you'll respond to it. When you come to the realization of that which the Master has spent thousands of years in teaching us, or trying to teach us, I will never leave you. If you walk through the waters, you will not drown. The waters have no power to drown you. If you go through the flames, they will not kindle upon you. They won't burn you. They haven't that power. I am with you, and I am the only power. I have not ordained death, nor have I ordained anything to create death. God has no pleasure in your dying. Turn ye and live. Then if God has no pleasure in your dying, do you not see that God has not ordained anything to cause your death? And that eliminates disease. It eliminates old age, too. Because too many people leave this earth because of the infirmities of old age. And that's nonsense. They have accepted power in their calendars. They have a calendar on the wall which is only meant to give us a division of our hours and days. But automatically they give it power, and as each day passes, they accept the belief that they're older and weaker. They're doing it to themselves. They're giving power to the calendar. The calendar has no power. The coming of day and night has no power. The coming of day and night has nothing to do with age. It only has to do with the rotation of the earth, the planets. It has nothing to do with age, but we have accepted this as if all of this was meant for age. Age really means experience. Experience can only come with age. Maturity can only come with age. How then can it be made the means of deterioration? It isn't a means of deterioration. We are in accepting the belief that it is meant for us to age, that it is natural for us to age. It isn't. It isn't at all. I would like very much to tell you that after many years of research, the results of this research have now been handed to the medical authorities in the United States, in colleges, in medical schools. This is the result of this research. Deterioration of body, senility of body, comes only from eating wrong foods. We have taken aged bodies and made them young by changing their food. We have taken young bodies and have aged them and made them senile by changing their food. Now we can report this. The children born today, if they will follow a program of eating of correct foods, will live to a normal span of 100 without senility. And 3 generations from now, it will be 150 years without senility. This is an official report by a responsible medical body, now being circulated in responsible medical circles. In other words, God has not ordained that we grow old. God has not ordained that we become senile or weak. We have brought it upon ourselves ignorantly, of course not intentionally, ignorantly, and we have the power to overcome it. No. Those who have turned to the spiritual path may give far less thought to food, while even they may not ignore the fact that it is not wisdom to poison oneself and expect truth to overcome it every day. But in the light of spiritual wisdom, we know beyond doubt that there is a keenness of perception, spiritual, mental, which results in greater physical strength and endurance and health. And through our work, this is accomplished through the realization of God as constituting the essence and substance and law of our individual being, and of refraining from giving power to thing or thought, to material law or mental law. Always remembering, when faced with erroneous conditions, physical or mental, did God ordain you? Are you God empowered? Is there a law of God to support you, maintain you, sustain you? And if you find that it can't be, then you no longer have to fear it. You can rest in the Word and watch it destroy itself. You see, we haven't waited for our class to teach the infinite way. We have been doing it here. We may be making the class unnecessary, because the class really is unnecessary to anyone who can grasp these principles, begin to put them into operation in their consciousness, in their thought, abide with them, let them abide in you, be willing to experiment, be willing to try them, not necessarily accept them in blind faith because a man says so, but if they sound reasonable, if they sound in accord with the teaching of Jesus Christ, at least put them to work. Just as you should now, every time you go anywhere or come from anywhere, meet anyone or leave anyone, realize this invisible presence which is a spiritual bond between us or those others whom you meet. Just as you must always from now on practice this presence of God, realize God as the nature of individual being, realize God as the only life, the only law, the only wisdom. So, whenever confronted with any form of discord, lack, limitation, age, sin, false appetite, disease, erroneous characteristics of character, be willing to ask yourself, shall I accept this appearance or shall I question it? Is this God ordained? Has it a law of God to support it? Has it the substance of God's body? Is it showing forth God's life? That means eternal life. Well, you know, no disease yet has ever shown forth eternality or immortality. Therefore, there's no life of God in a disease. And if God is infinite, there is no other life. Therefore, disease has nothing to support it, nothing to perpetuate it. And right now, only universal belief is keeping it alive in the world. It need not keep it alive in your consciousness, for the 91st Psalm says, 1,000 will fall here and 10,000 here. It will not come nigh your dwelling place if you will accept this principle. The Master says in the 15th chapter of John, abide in this word, let this word abide in you, you will bear fruit richly. Do not abide in this word, do not let this word abide in you, you will be as a branch of a tree that is cut off and withereth. You have it within your own jurisdiction, control, to decide to what extent you will continue to accept two powers, or to what extent you will question any power, any substance, or any law, or any activity that is not easily recognized as being of God, eternal and immortal. Now, when I say you have it within your jurisdiction, I am speaking to you who are in this room. Those who are out on the street, most of them, do not have it within their jurisdiction because they have not yet opened their minds or their consciousness to seeking truth. Therefore, they would not be in a position to recognize it or believe it, even if it were presented to them. In other words, this, which is the result of 30 years actual living and practice in my life and 13 years of search before that, I am free in imparting to you. You couldn't pay me 10,000 pounds to go out on the corner of Hyde Park and tell this. You just couldn't. Because I know right well that even if a crowd would gather and listen, they'd perhaps call the man in the white coat to pick me up. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't accept it. They are not ready. When they are ready, they will be in a room like this, listening to a message like this. That is why the Master said, I have come only to those of my own household. Do you have ears and do not hear? Do you have eyes and do not see? In other words, only those of enough spiritual discernment to be drawn to a spiritual message and to be able to sit for an hour and listen, only those have the power of jurisdiction to be able to say, I can try this, I can put this into practice. All the others must wait until some event in their lives drives them also to a search for truth. Everyone will discover when they reach the end of the search that God alone is the creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle of all that is, even in this world, and God is the only law that operates with power in consciousness, and that all other powers, human, material, mental, are not powers but can operate as power only as long as they can get someone to believe in it. I'm going to close this by telling you a little story which is an absolutely true story for which I can vouch. There is a man in Hawaii, and in politics he made an enemy, and this enemy went to a bad kahuna to have this man cursed so that he would die. And he did not hesitate to tell this man he was going to do it. Well, a few days later, the man hadn't died, and the enemy came to him and said, you are all right? Yes, I'm fine. Oh, he began to tremble a bit. Why, he said, because you went to the kahuna? Yes. Oh, that won't hurt me. This enemy then went to the kahuna to find out, why is this? This man isn't sick. This man hasn't died. The kahuna looked at him and said, is this man a full Hawaiian? Oh, no, he said, he's half Hawaiian and half Chinese. Oh, that's why. This doesn't work on the Chinese. You know why it doesn't work on the Chinese? They haven't been taught